The garage smelled like money and failure. It was the kind of space that had been designed to impress 22 feet of polished concrete floor, track lighting positioned at angles that made even the most ordinary machine look like something pulled from a dream. But the centerpiece tonight was not ordinary. The centerpiece was a Bugatti Chiron Supersport in matte titanium, and it had not moved in 72 hours. Ava Sinclair stood at the far edge of the room, with her arms crossed and her face arranged into an expression that gave nothing away. She was 36 years old, the founder and chief executive of Sinclair Automotive Group, a company that designed, imported, and serviced the rarest production cars on the American market. She had built the business from a $10,000 loan and a used diagnostic machine she'd bought at an auction in Phoenix. She had negotiated with the Swiss. She had cold-called the Germans. She had flown to Molsheim twice in 1 year without being invited. And on the second visit, Bugatti's head of partnerships had finally sat down across from her and called her tenacious. She had smiled and said, "I prefer precise." Precision was why the Chiron was hers. Precision was why she had paid for it, not from the company account, but from her personal one, a private, deliberate transaction that meant the car belonged to no spreadsheet and no shareholder. It was the only thing in her life that did not have a governance structure around it. And now it was broken. The fault had appeared on Tuesday morning. She had been preparing for a drive to the Meadowbrook Forum, where she was scheduled to sign a contract extension with Harman Lyell, a hotel developer with a fleet program worth $47 million over 3 years. The Chiron had always been her closing gesture, not an ostentatious display, but a quiet signal to people like Harman that Sinclair Automotive was the real thing. You didn't drive a matte titanium Chiron if you were performing success. You drove it if success was already behind you. The engine had refused to start. The instrument cluster had lit up and gone dark. The ignition had pulsed once and locked. She had called her senior technician immediately. He had arrived within the hour, run his standard diagnostics, and looked at her with the kind of carefully neutral face that men wear when they do not want to say they have no idea what is happening. By Wednesday afternoon, there were 8 technicians in the garage. By Thursday morning, there were 20. They came from Sinclair's own service division, from the Bugatti certified workshop in Miami, from a specialist firm in Scottsdale that charged $400 an hour and billed in 15-minute increments. They had laptops open and cables running. They had discussed the fault in English and in German. One of them had phoned a contact in Molsheim at 2 in the morning, Central European Time, and described the fault codes in detail. The Molsheim contact had never heard of that particular combination. The contract signing had been rescheduled once, then again. Harman Lyell had been gracious about it. But Ava could hear something in his voice, a slight adjustment. A recalibration of his confidence in her. She knew what it meant. She had heard that sound before, always from people who had decided she was slightly less than what they had imagined. She would not reschedule a third time. The garage was quiet now, in the particular exhausted way that rooms go quiet when everyone in them has admitted, privately, that they are out of ideas. The 20 technicians moved around the car with their tools and their terminals, like physicians attending a patient they did not understand. They were not incompetent. That was what made it worse. They were genuinely skilled people who had run out of road. Ava watched them and said nothing. Her coffee had gone cold. She had been standing for 3 hours. She did not sit down. The delivery van arrived at the service entrance at 4:47 inches the afternoon. It was an unremarkable vehicle, white, with a magnetic sign on the door that read "Coal Parts and Supply" in plain blue lettering. The man who stepped out was in his mid-30s, with grease worked so deeply into the creases of his knuckles that soap alone had long since given up on them. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow and dark canvas work pants with a worn patch on the left knee. He had the kind of face that would be handsome if he were ever not tired. His name was Ethan Cole. He came around to the passenger side and opened the door. A small girl climbed down, landing both feet together on the asphalt, with the particular deliberateness of an 8-year-old who has decided that jumping is undignified. She was wearing a yellow rain jacket despite the clear sky, and she carried a paperback book with a picture of a dolphin on the cover. "Stay close," Ethan said. "I know," she said, in the tone of someone who has been told this several hundred times. Her name was Lily. Ethan approached the service desk with a parts order form clipped to a board. He was there to deliver a set of legacy throttle body gaskets he'd sourced from a warehouse in Indianapolis, an order Sinclair Automotive had placed 8 days ago and forgotten about in the commotion of the last 3 days. The desk attendant looked at him and then past him, toward the main garage, where the scene of the failed diagnostics was still underway. "Leave it at the back," the attendant said, not unkindly. "I need a signature." The attendant sighed and walked away to find someone with authority. Ethan and Lily waited. Lily leaned against the doorframe and looked through the glass into the lit interior of the main garage bay, where the Bugatti sat in the center of the room like a sleeping animal. "What's wrong with it?" she asked. "I don't know yet. It looks like it can't breathe right." Ethan glanced at her. Then he looked at the car. One of the technicians near the door had overheard. He turned around a thick-necked man in a branded polo shirt, clearly from the Miami firm, whose name badge said Greg in aggressive block letters. He took in Ethan's work clothes and Lily's dolphin book and the delivery board under Ethan's arm, and he turned back around without speaking. Ethan did not say anything. He was already looking at the car differently. Not at the obvious surfaces, the hood, the visible components, the places that 20 other pairs of eyes had already exhausted. He was looking at the geometry of the thing, the way the cables ran, the slight variance in the shadow pattern on the left flank that shouldn't have been there. He was quiet for a long time. Ava Sinclair crossed the room on her way to speak with one of the senior technicians, passed within 10 feet of the door, and did not look up. The attendant came back with a junior manager named Todd, who scanned the invoice on Ethan's board and signed the form with the distracted efficiency of someone whose mind was elsewhere. As Ethan turned to go, he stopped. "You mind if I ask what the fault code sequence is?" Todd looked at him. "Excuse me?" "The car. I saw the codes on that screen from here. C1, 847, and B2, 219 running simultaneously." He paused. "That's not a software conflict." Todd's expression moved through several phases. Confusion, mild offense, and finally a reluctant curiosity he clearly resented. "And you would know that because I've seen it before." Ethan set his board down on the counter. "Give me 5 minutes." The laughter came fast. Not cruel laughter, the quick, reflexive kind that emerges when something is so improbable that the alternative is silence. Greg, from the Miami firm, turned around again. 2 of the other technicians exchanged a look. One of them made a small sound that was not quite a word. Ava heard the laugh from across the room. She walked over. She looked at Ethan for 3 full seconds. He met her gaze without flinching or adjusting. 20 engineers, she said. 72 hours. And you want 5 minutes? Yes. Based on seeing a fault code through a window. Based on understanding why those 2 codes don't appear together in a normal diagnostic scenario, and what it means when they do. Another beat of silence. Around them, the garage had quietly oriented itself toward this conversation. Ava was not a person given to impulsive decisions. Everything she did had a framework, a rationale, a chain of reasoning she could trace backward to first principles. But she was also not a person who confused process with wisdom. She had been standing in this room for 3 hours, watching a very expensive process produce nothing. "If you make it worse," she said, "I hold you responsible." "Understood." Lily looked up from her book. "You can do it, Dad." She said it quietly, without drama, in the straightforward way that children state things they consider obvious. No one in the room laughed this time. He did not open the hood immediately. He walked around the car once, slowly, with his hands in his pockets and his eyes moving in a pattern that was clearly not random, not the tourist's appreciation of the body lines, but the systematic sweep of someone mapping a system. He crouched near the left rear quarter panel for a long moment. He stood and looked at the front grille. Greg said, "The primary systems are under the—" "I know where the primary systems are," Ethan said, without turning around. Silence. Ethan asked for a flathead, a trim removal tool, and a flashlight. Todd brought them. Ethan did not open the engine bay. Instead, he removed a small access panel on the left sill, a component so incidental that it existed primarily to allow inspection of a wire routing harness during factory assembly. It was not a diagnostic access point. None of the 20 technicians had touched it because none of them had thought to. Ethan shone the flashlight inside. He was still for a moment. Then he reached in, very carefully, and touched something. He withdrew his hand and looked at the flashlight beam, and then at Lily, who was watching from the doorway with her book closed against her chest. He reached in again. A small adjustment, not a repair, not a replacement, just a repositioning of something that had migrated a fraction of an inch from where it was supposed to be. A grounding tab on the secondary security module's mounting bracket. It had shifted during transport or during an early inspection attempt, creating a minute but absolute interference between two systems that were never designed to communicate with each other. The interference had triggered both fault codes simultaneously, and the car's safety logic, correctly interpreting the combination as a potential bypass attempt, had locked every startup sequence. It was not a software issue. It was not a hardware failure. It was a contact point, the width of a thumbnail, sitting 3 millimeters out of place. Ethan pressed the bracket back into position, replaced the access panel, and stood up. He looked at Ava. No. She looked at him for one long second. Then she walked to the driver's side, opened the door, and got in. The ignition turned. The W16 engine did not whisper. It announced itself a low, layered sound that was less like a mechanical event and more like a geological one. Felt in the sternum before it was heard by the ears, the instrument cluster lit up cleanly. Every system returned green. The garage went quiet in a way that rooms rarely go quiet, not the absence of noise, but the presence of a specific kind of stunned attention, the silence of 20 people revising something they had believed was settled. Ava cut the engine. She sat in the car for a moment. Then she got out. She looked at Ethan Cole, his worn knuckles, his flannel shirt, his daughter in the doorway, and for the first time in 72 hours, something shifted in her face that was not fatigue. Greg was the first technician to move. He walked directly to the access panel and removed it himself. Spent 3 minutes with his own flashlight, and then stood up and said nothing. His face was very still. 2 other technicians repeated the process. Then a third. Each of them performed the same reconstruction, the mental walkback through their own diagnostic process, searching for the moment when they could have found it. None of them found the moment easily. The sill panel was not in any standard checklist. The grounding tab was not in any fault code lookup. It required knowing that those 2 codes could coexist in a locking condition only when the security module was reading a phantom interference signal, a detail that lived in a corner of the system architecture that most technicians had never needed to visit. "How did you know?" Todd asked. Ethan picked up his delivery board from the counter where he'd left it. "I designed a similar safety interlock once. Different car. Same logic." Ava had been standing slightly apart from the group, watching. Now she took a step forward. "Who are you?" Ethan looked at her. "I deliver parts." Lily, from the doorway. "He used to build cars." The words landed in the room the way small, true things sometimes do quietly, but with weight. Ava studied him. There was something in his posture. Now that she was paying attention, not the posture of a tradesman who had stumbled into a lucky guess, but the specific stillness of someone who had once occupied a very different room and chosen to leave it. She had met enough engineers in her career to recognize the difference between a person who understood machines and a person who understood systems. Ethan Cole understood systems. "I'd like to talk to you," she said. "I have 2 more deliveries. Tomorrow then." He considered this for a moment, not the offer, but her. The directness of her, the controlled quality of her attention, the way she had made the decision to let him near the car, and was not embarrassed about what that decision had revealed about the limits of her own team. "My daughter has school until 3, he said. 3:30 works." She did not wait for the meeting to start researching him. By 9 that evening, her assistant had compiled a preliminary file. By midnight, Ava had read it twice and requested 3 additional documents. By 2 in the morning, she was sitting at her kitchen table with a cold glass of water and the kind of focus that had made her company what it was, reading through the public record of a project she had heard of years ago and never followed closely enough. The project was called the Halcyon Initiative. It had been a private venture, a consortium of aerospace and automotive engineers, funded by a Seattle-based technology holding company, attempting to build a ground effects road car that applied aviation-derived aerodynamic control systems to a street-legal platform. The concept had been extraordinary. The engineering had been, by all available accounts, even more extraordinary. There were 2 patents filed under Ethan Cole's name, one for a torque vectoring algorithm, one for a modular safety interlock architecture. The second one, she noticed now, was directly related to the system he had diagnosed in her car tonight. The Halcyon Initiative had been canceled. Not because of engineering failure, because the funding company had been acquired, and the acquiring firm had decided the project posed a competitive threat to an existing partnership. The team had been dissolved. The prototypes had been purchased and removed. The patents had been licensed to a third party and never commercially deployed. Ethan Cole had been 31 years old. His wife, Rebecca, had died 8 months before the project was canceled. A brain aneurysm. Sudden, no warning. He had taken paternity leave to care for their daughter, returned to the project, and then watched it be shut down without appeal. 18 months later, he had formed Cole Parts and Supply. Ava set down the papers and looked at the window. She could see the street below the yellow intervals of the lights, the occasional passing headlights, the empty geometry of the intersection at the corner. She thought about Lily saying, "It looks like it can't breathe right." She thought about what it meant to watch something you had built be taken away, and then to go on building smaller things because building was the only thing you knew how to do. She was not a sentimental person. She did not deal in what-ifs, or injustice, or in the particular category of anger that comes from watching talented people be wasted by systems that don't deserve them. But she was precise, and the precise observation, tonight, was that Ethan Cole was one of the most technically capable people she had ever encountered, and he was spending his working hours delivering gaskets. Part 7. The Man Who Called It Luck. The meeting the next afternoon was not private. This was partly logistics. The conference room had been booked, and Ava's afternoon was scheduled in 30-minute blocks. But it was also, she admitted to herself, a deliberate choice. She had wanted to see how Ethan handled a room. What she had not anticipated was that the room would handle him first. Marcus Webb arrived early. Webb was Sinclair Automotive's Director of Technical Operations, a compact, carefully groomed man of 44 who had been with the company for 9 years and who managed, with considerable skill, the impression that he was the most technically accomplished person in any given conversation. He was not incompetent. He was, in fact, quite good. But he was the kind of person whose competence was organized around visibility, around being seen to be the indispensable one, and Ethan Cole's appearance the previous evening had introduced a variable he had not scheduled for. Webb sat down across from Ethan before Ava had arrived and looked at him with the flat, assessing courtesy of a man who has decided something and is simply announcing the verdict. "You got lucky," Webb said. "Those panels shift occasionally. Any one of us could have found it if we'd been doing a full physical inventory of the chassis mounting points." Ethan looked at him. "Then why didn't you?" "Because we were working from the fault codes. Standard protocol." The fault codes pointed to a software conflict. They were wrong. Fault codes are generated by the car's interpretation of its own sensor data, Ethan said. If the sensor data is being corrupted by a phantom signal, the codes will be wrong. The car can't diagnose interference from outside the system. Something outside the system has to do that. He paused. That's not in the standard protocol, because the standard protocol was written by people who assumed the diagnostic inputs were clean. Webb was quiet for a moment. "My point," he said, "is that we would have gotten there in another 72 hours, maybe. Or another week." Ethan's voice was neutral, not unkind. "I'm not saying your team isn't good. I'm saying the checklist had a gap." Ava came in then. She read the room in the time it took to pull out a chair, and she sat down and said nothing about what she had read. Webb turned to her. "I want to register my concern that an outside party with no formal relationship to the company was given unsupervised access to a client's vehicle." "Noted," Ava said. "There are liability implications, Marcus." Her voice was not loud. "The car is running." He stopped. The meeting continued. But Ethan noticed, over the next 40 minutes, the small maneuvers. The way Webb positioned himself as the authority on every technical question, the way he redirected Ava's attention whenever she addressed Ethan directly, the way he twice referred to Ethan's solution as the panel thing, a phrasing that was technically accurate and entirely designed to diminish. Ethan did not rise to any of it. He answered questions when they were addressed to him, and was quiet when they were not. He had learned, in the years since Halcyon, that defensiveness was expensive and that precision was its own argument. 3 days later, Ava called a technical review. It was not advertised as related to the Chiron fault, but everyone in the room understood that it was. She had spent the intervening days doing what she always did when something had genuinely surprised her. She had gone back to the beginning. She had pulled the service records for every Bugatti and high-specification European vehicle that Sinclair had serviced in the previous 4 years. She had asked one of her analysts to flag every instance where the vehicle had been returned for a secondary issue within 90 days of a primary service. The number was higher than she had expected. She had also, on a separate track, hired an independent consultant to review the Halcyon patent that Ethan had filed, the one for the modular safety interlock architecture. The consultant's report had taken 2 days and had concluded, in precise and somewhat startled language, that the architecture described in the patent was not only elegant but that it addressed, in its theoretical form, the exact category of phantom signal interference that had locked her Chiron. She shared both sets of findings at the technical review without announcing their source or their purpose. She simply put the data on the table and let the room look at it. Webb had prepared a presentation. He had anticipated a conversation about the Chiron event, and his presentation was structured to frame it as an isolated anomaly, a statistical outlier, a one-time occurrence that reflected the limits of the available diagnostic tooling rather than any systematic gap in the team's methodology. The secondary service numbers made his presentation difficult to deliver. "These figures," he said, "need context. The secondary service rate for ultra-high specification vehicles is—" "I know the industry baseline," Ava said. "We're running 14 points above it." Silence. "Some of that," Webb said carefully, "is attributable to client behavior. These customers drive their vehicles in ways that—" "Marcus." Again, not loud. "What is the primary cause of the secondary service events?" A pause. "Incomplete resolution of the initial fault, meaning we fixed what the checklist told us to fix, and missed what the checklist didn't cover." He did not answer that directly. Ava reached into the folder in front of her and produced a single printed page, the abstract of Ethan's patent, with 2 paragraphs highlighted. She set it in the center of the table. "Someone filed this 7 years ago," she said. "It describes exactly the gap we've been filling, with repeat visits and apologies. I want to know why we don't have something like it." The room was quiet in the particular way of people calculating. Webb looked at the document. He looked at it for a long time, and then, with the careful control of a person maintaining a position that is becoming harder to hold, he said, "I'd want to have our team review this before drawing any—" "Your team reviewed the car for 72 hours, Ava said. "The man who filed this patent reviewed it for 5 minutes. She did not say it with cruelty. She said it the way she said everything. Precisely. And only once." Part 9. What he needed that she couldn't buy. She called Ethan that evening. He answered on the 3rd ring. She could hear, faintly, the sound of a television and what might have been Lily asking about something in the background. "I have a proposal," she said. "I assumed you would. Senior technical consultant. 40 weeks a year minimum. Full benefits, staff support. I'll put a number to it that you won't need to negotiate." She waited. Through the phone, the television sound changed a quieter channel, or perhaps a different room. No, he said. She had not been expecting that. She had made the offer large enough to forestall negotiation, not refusal. She sat with the word for a moment. Can I ask why? Lily's school has a pickup at 3:15. Her teacher does office hours on Thursdays, and I try to make those. She has a swimming lesson on Tuesday afternoons and a reading group on Friday mornings that she's been in since second grade. I built my schedule around those things. What you're describing would take the schedule apart. Ava was quiet for a moment. She was sitting in her kitchen again, the same chair, the same cold glass, the same night geometry of the street outside. She was thinking about the $47 million contract that had been signed, finally 2 days ago, with Harmon Lyell showing up to their rescheduled meeting with the particular courtesy of a man who has revised his confidence back upward. She was thinking about the secondary service numbers and the patent abstract and the look on Marcus Webb's face when the data had been put on the table. She was also thinking about something she had not thought about in a long time, what it would look like to build something around a person's actual life rather than around a schedule she had decided on in advance. What if the schedule were yours? She said. A pause. Meaning? You determine the hours. You determine the location. Remote when possible. On-site. When genuinely necessary. No minimum weeks. I compensate you per engagement, a rate that respects what you're actually providing, not what a standard consultant contract would put on paper. She paused. I want your thinking, not your presence. Those are different things. The line was quiet for several seconds. I'd need to see it in writing, he said. Tomorrow morning, and I can say no to a specific engagement if the timing doesn't work. Yes. Another pause. Lily's going to want to know if the car is going to keep working, he said. The corner of Ava's mouth moved not quite a smile. Tell her it is. And that, I'm paying close attention now. The first engagement was 4 weeks later. Ethan had reviewed, remotely, the service records for a Pagani Huayra that had been returned to Sinclair twice in 6 months, with an intermittent electrical fault that no one had been able to reproduce consistently. He had sent a 2-page memo, not a report, a memo, spare and specific, identifying the fault as a vibration-induced microfracture in a secondary ground strap. He had included a diagram of the inspection method and a note about which tool would be required, one that the service division did not currently stock. He had recommended acquiring 2 of them. The repair took 40 minutes. The client called to say it was the first time in 8 months the car had felt right. Marcus Webb submitted his resignation 6 weeks after the technical review. The letter was professional. The timing was not coincidental. Ava accepted it with the same courteous neutrality she brought to every document that crossed her desk, and she spent the following weekend redesigning the technical operations structure around a different set of values, not hierarchy and defensibility, but curiosity and precision. She promoted 2 of her younger technicians into newly defined roles. She began a review of every standard checklist in the service division. She hired an outside firm to audit the secondary service rate on a rolling basis. These were not dramatic changes. They were methodical ones. They were the kind of changes that do not generate headlines, but that compound, quietly, over time. On a Tuesday afternoon in early December, Ethan brought Lily to the Sinclair facility for the first time since the night of the Chiron. It was not a formal visit. He had a brief on-site consultation, a new client vehicle, with a fault in the adaptive damping system, and Lily's swimming lesson had been canceled, and she had announced that she wanted to come. Ethan did not argue. He had learned, over the years, that there were certain positions Lily took that it was simply more efficient to accept. The main garage was different from how she remembered it. The track lighting was the same, but the Bugatti was not in the center of the room. It had been returned to Ava's personal garage, and the bay held 2 other vehicles now, both under assessment. The floor was busy, but not frantic. People were working with the quality of attention that comes from understanding what they are looking for. Lily walked in with her dolphin book under her arm and looked around with the careful assessment of someone building a mental map. Ava came in from the office side of the building. She was in dark trousers and a gray shirt with the sleeves pushed up, which was as close as she got to informal. She had been on a call with a logistics partner and had not had time to change. She stopped when she saw Lily. Lily looked at her. "Did it keep working?" Lily asked. "It did," Ava said. "Good." Lily considered this. "You should probably check it again in 6 months. The corner of Ava's mouth did the thing it had done on the phone, not quite a smile, but close enough that someone watching might use that word. "I'll put it in the calendar," she said. Ethan, who had been watching this exchange from the far side of the room, turned back to the vehicle he was assessing and said nothing. He had spent 6 years measuring the weight of silence, and he knew the difference between silence that was empty and silence that was full of something still forming. This one was the second kind. It was not an ending. Endings had clean edges and a sense of completion, and life, the real texture of it, did not work that way. It worked the way a well-designed system works. Incrementally, through small calibrations, each one so minor that you almost don't notice it until you look back and see how far you've come from where you were. The Bugatti had been locked because a contact point had drifted a fraction of an inch out of place. A single, careful pressure from someone who knew where to look had brought it back. The engine had spoken. The room had gone still. After that, things had simply continued, but in the right direction. Lily opened her book to the page she'd bookmarked and sat down on the bench near the door. The dolphins were migrating. She had explained to her father that morning, and she needed to find out if they made it. Around her, the garage worked. Outside, the winter sky was the particular deep blue that arrives just before the light fails, completely not dark yet, but decided. The kind of sky that makes the lit windows of a building look warm from the street. The kind of warmth that is not performed but simply present, unremarkable, and exact. Ethan Cole pressed a diagnostic probe to a contact point and listened to what the instrument told him. It told him what he had suspected. He made a note on his board. He would write the memo tonight, after dinner, after Lily was in bed and the house had gone to the quiet he had learned, these past years, to call enough. It was not the life he had planned at 31. It was the life that had happened instead, and he had stopped some time ago, on a night he no longer precisely remembered, treating those two things as a loss.